Today I want to talk about using expressive brushstrokes in our painting. And what I mean by that is using brushstrokes that make our painting look like oil paint as opposed to look like a photograph. To me, that's what makes painting stand out and look different than photography is the brushwork. And we want to use that brushwork to show a lot of different things in the painting. One would be the form. Using your brush stroke to follow the form, like the rounded form or shape of a tree trunk, the slanted direction of a mountain, or using the brushwork to follow the flow of a river. Much more expressive than just trying to copy the photograph and make it look photorealistic. So we're going to get into how to do that today. But one of the main things we have to do in order to achieve a good expressive brushstroke is to simplify your subject. And that's real important because if we can't see past all the detail and clutter, it is hard to use expressive brushstroke. You're going to be bogged down with detail and unnecessary things in your painting that just don't help the painting. So let's look first here at an image. I'm going to do a short step-by-step here of this photograph to kind of explain a bit more about the expressive part of the brushstrokes. Now, this is a cliff in southern Utah, and there's a lot of detail. There's a lot of crevices and cracks and things in the rock. It has nice shadow pattern in here, but I think it has too much. I need to simplify that to make it work better because it's hard to use big, bold brushstrokes when you have too much going on, too many little dark and light value changes. That's what detail is. So I want to get rid of that, simplify that a lot more, and also simplify the values. The rocks, simplify them to 2 to 3 values. The grassy area, same thing, 2, 3 values. The dirt, 2 to 3 values. So everything is reduced, simplified. And if I can do that, create simpler shapes and simpler values, then color becomes a lot easier. And when the color is easier, then how I apply it, the brush strokes become easier also. So I'm starting first with just a thumbnail to simplify. And this is, I don't know, about 3 by 5 inch, somewhere around that size, just to reduce everything right now to a simple dark and light. So you can see the shadow pattern on the cliff here. Just a simple, reduced all the busyness by having less of these shadow patterns on the cliff. A few small ones up there, but you can see the photograph has a lot more. I mean, it's just too busy. I don't need that much. So I picked out some of the important areas, like these two, and then maybe one over here, to simplify. And it took 3 or 4, 5 thumbnail drawings. I think it took about 3. But creating shapes that work, creating this shape here in the foreground on the dirt, on this kind of road, and then the shape or shadow pattern on the grass. Then the rest is light areas with a few dark shapes of shrubbery. So when I look at this, I want to reduce this photograph to as many big shapes as possible. And it just makes it easier to get started and start applying color and brushwork as opposed to trying to just start to pick away at detail. So shape-wise, I have the shape of the sky. It's one shape. Shape of this mountain in the background is another. Then the shape of the mountain here, or cliff, as another. That's 3 shapes. And then the 4th shape is just the foreground. Now, I'm breaking up these shapes a little more, like the shadow pattern, but that's my big, simple 4 shapes. And if you read John Carlson's book on landscape painting, chapter on composition and one on design, he really talks about reducing everything to 4 to 6 large shapes. And here's my 4 shapes. Now I'm going to break this shape up right here with the shadow patterns, make it a little more complicated. Same thing with the foreground shape. I'm going to have this shadow shape here and shadow shape here. So I'm breaking it up more, but I'm starting with that. So on my canvas, that's what I want to start with. 1 shape, 2, 3, and 4. Reduce everything as simple as you can, and then gradually build it up. You want to really resist the idea of getting as much detail down on the canvas during this drawing stage. It's tempting because it starts to look pretty good. You get all the darks in there and the lights and some detail, and it's really enjoyable to look at and enjoyable to do. But what you're going to end up doing is have a finished drawing, and you'll be afraid to mess it up with color. You'll be real tight and picky with the color, and that will mess up your painting. But if I keep it big and simple like this, the drawing, then as I lay in thicker, more expressive brushwork, I can do more with that, as opposed to trying to carefully paint around the detail. So no detail. And I started with just washes of color with the blue. This is ultramarine blue. This is burnt sienna with orange. This is violet, a little bit of burnt sienna. The violet makes this cliff go back further because cool colors recede. And then just kind of a olive green or yellow, green, and orange, or yellow, green, and burnt sienna for the grass here. And I don't have to worry about the color. It's just basic idea of what color the rock is and the grass and so on. Just need to get something down there. It gets these shapes down. And I do it with a little bit of color this time. A lot of times I won't. I'll just use burnt sienna or raw umber to draw the big simple shapes and maybe a few values. And I block it in with, again, the overall sense of color for each shape. I don't have to worry about getting things right because it's just the start. It's just kind of the building blocks that I'm going to paint on top of. Now the next stage is when I'm starting to pick out the shadow patterns. So the sunlit cliff is orange and burnt sienna. So the shadow is going to be darker and cooler, so it's burnt sienna and violet. I'm using a dioxazine purple. You could use blue and burnt sienna or blue and orange. Something that's going to be cooler but still have that local color of orange or burnt sienna in there. And then the shadow here on the green, again, ultramarine blue. Then some kind of yellow to turn it green, yellow ochre or cad yellow. And then adding orange or burnt sienna to mute it, because it is not an intense color. And then just a violet with a little burnt sienna here. So this is my kind of finished drawing. And again, I'm drawing with a little bit of simple color. Could just draw with just burnt sienna and paint thinner and get the shadows in. That works just as well. I'm also trying to stay away from outline as much as possible. I've got some outline here, to show the roundness of the landscape. But as soon as you can, get to just drawing with shape by filling in. Like I didn't outline the shadow pattern first. I just filled it in. Then I could wipe out if I needed to adjust that shape, or use a little outline after I get the shape down there just to refine it. I think I might have a little bit of outline here just to refine the shape of the cliff there. But I'm trying to see things in terms of one shape against another shape, as opposed to seeing it in terms of outline. Then I'm going to start the painting. Get a little bit thicker. This isn't nearly thick enough. Orange, burnt sienna, and white to get that sunlit feel here. Now there is a lot of gray. There's a lot of muted color on top of the orange and burnt sienna. But I can't get that right away. I have to start with just simplicity of what color is the cliff in sunlight. And I picked a reddish orange, burnt sienna and orange. I could have picked alizarin crimson and orange, or crimson and cad yellow. Could go a lot of different directions. There's no one definite right color, but I do have to make it the right value, and it has to be warm because it's so sunlit. Same thing with the shadows here, refining them a little bit. using dioxazine purple and a little orange or burnt sienna. But this is the color here I'm using for the cliff. So here's the burnt sienna, here's the orange. So it could vary from a bit more orange and gradually get a little more burnt sienna, but that would all be within the light area. More burnt sienna in the shadow with some ultramarine blue added to it to cool it down, or violet. And here's the violet, the dioxazine purple, with white added to it to make it lighter. And I'm adding that if I want to gray down this orange and burnt sienna. So this is my grain. This is all for the lights right now. This is my grain or muting color, modifying color, this violet, because that's going to modify the orange and burnt sienna. It's going to cool it, gray it, maybe make it not so intense. Then the next stage here is my greens. And I'm going more, but not a real strong green. The desert doesn't have bright, intense greens like on the East Coast. So they're going to be more muted. Most of the greens in the desert are a kind of a yellowish orange green, or a yellow green with burnt sienna in it. Same thing. It's just going to give me a slightly muted but very warm green. I guess you could think in terms of olive green, but olive isn't on the color wheel. I like to think in terms of the color wheel. So this would be yellow green, cad yellow, and ultramarine blue for the yellow green. Then adding a little orange or burnt sienna to modify it or mute it a little bit. And that's what I mean by modifying it. I'm making it less intense with the burnt sienna. And this is the greens here. So I have ultramarine blue, cad yellow light, and I'm adding, I think this is burnt sienna. But it could be orange. It could be alizarin crimson. Any kind of reddish, orangish color that I can add to the yellow green to make it slightly modified or muted. You can see how intense that green can be here, but getting some of that burnt sienna or orange in there mutes it. Also, I could use alizarin crimson to mute it, which I'm doing a little bit there. So it gives me a little bit different look on muting it, depending on which one I use. But both are right. There's not just one perfect color. What matters is getting this color the right value and the right temperature. You know, it's sunlit green, it's warm, and it has to be the right value. But I could use yellow ochre, phthalo blue, cad yellow, phthalo blue, any kind of red to mute it. It depends on which one you want. So color is almost just more of a choice, and not so much there's an exact color you have to find. So now I've got the greens kind of blocked in again with those three colors, the cad yellow, ultramarine blue, and a little bit of burnt sienna or orange. Here's the shadow. I really haven't done anything with the shadow on the ground yet. That's, again, violet and burnt sienna, because it's a cooler version of this, which is orange and burnt sienna. And I'm starting to lay my paint in thicker now in the lights. And that's why I want to keep this really thick. Now, this was just to show what colors I'm mixing and how I kind of mix them together. But I put out 3 times as much orange and burnt sienna in the middle of my palette. I mean, I have the colors all squeezed out up here. You can't see, but I mix big piles of this. Some of it a bit more with burnt sienna, some a bit more with orange, and they all blend in there. And I'll have the violet and just gradually add a little bit to the edge as I think I need it. And you can see, you know, this has a bit more burnt sienna to it. This has a bit more orange. Here's the violet. It's creating some of that grayish color that's there. Some of that grayish color is because the form is turning. So it's brighter, lighter, and gradually get a little darker and cooler as it turns around. Some of it is also the patina or the coloring of the rock. And I don't care which one it is. It just works when I add the violet in there. So some color is real strong with the orange or burnt sienna, and some is real muted by adding the violet. And I want that combination of both. I don't want all intense colors, and I don't want all gray colors. And I'm allowing the brush strokes to show. So this is my thicker thick paint here, I'll have thick paint here. All in the lights are going to be thicker paint. And while the shadows will be a little thicker than this, they won't be as thick as the lights. And that's that thick and thin contrast that makes your brush strokes work better. But some of my brush strokes are following the form. Some are just going different directions just for the sake of going a different direction. But I'm trying to follow the form a lot of times. And that's going to make the brush strokes work a lot better. Because their purpose isn't just to fill in and look photographic. The brush strokes are supposed to look like brush strokes, especially when the paint gets real thick. And here's another grayish color I want to introduce to the strong greens, the strong red-orange of the cliff, some of the background. I'm using a viridian hue and alizarin crimson, and then, of course, white to get it lighter. And that gives me a nice muted, somewhat gray, but almost more of a bluish green to a violet color. The viridian hue is a bluish green, but adding the red mutes it because red and green are complements, but it also gets slightly violet looking. It looks a little more violet because the blue-green is on the bluish side of green. And I'm adding a lot of that in here too. And this is my finished painting, but you can see the kind of the bluish green added in there. Some in here, some in the background, and even some up in here. Right there's that alizarin crimson and viridian hue. And a viridian hue is really just phthalo green, but it says viridian hue on there. So, but it's green and red violet is what it is, and it makes just a variety of color. And as I put that in, like a stroke of it there, stroke of it there, it's just to contrast the stronger color, the stronger greens. Because I don't want all my greens to be real intense. Have to lay a little bit of grayer color next to it. Some of these greens have been muted with just green and burnt sienna. So that combination of strong color, gray color, really makes the color more impactful. If you want really strong color in your painting, you have to have areas of gray to make the strong color stand out. Because if your painting is all very strong, intense, saturated color, they're all going to be screaming at you and nothing's going to make any sense. But if I have some muted color next to the strong color, like right here, really strong, here's more muted, then the muted color helps that stronger color to stand out and make a statement, as opposed to everything just screaming at you. It helps to have that variety. Then in the shadows, still the burnt sienna and orange with violet. And here the violet kind of takes over. I just wanted some stronger violet in the shadow to emphasize how cool the shadow is and how warm the sunlight area is. And that contrast of warm and cool suggests the sunlight. And colors, brush strokes back in here, again, following the kind of the slanted form of the background. Short, choppy, vertical strokes to suggest that shrubbery. In the shadows, I can kind of go any direction. I did use brush strokes here that kind of follow the vertical form of these rocks. Could have gone this way too. But shadows, you have more variety, I think, of what you can do with brush strokes. Or you don't have to have certain directions. I think in the light area, I really have to have a lot of brush strokes that follow the form. All these strokes kind of follow the half-rounded feel. Going this way, here they're going that way. So I want some variety. Also a little variety of thick and thin, even in the light. All my light paint, the brush strokes are very thick, but some are even thicker. So the lightest value, as I get lighter, those brush strokes become thicker and they stand out the most. The lights and the halftones, still thick, but not as thick as the highlights. And I still want them to stand out too, although sometimes the values are very close, like this value and that value. Not a lot of difference, but there's a little bit of difference there to show the form. But nowhere am I taking a clean fan brush and just blending all the brush strokes out. That would just kill the painting, but also kill the value contrast. And I have more variety of brush strokes and a little sense of busyness because I have all these little dark and lights and halftone in the cliff. So that's my busiest area, is in here. And I'm trying to keep the foreground a lot more simple. But you can see the brush strokes, this one going this way, that way, this way. All those really help show kind of the half roundedness of the ground. The ground is not flat by any means. It's a bunch of slanted areas. Slanted here. This one's even slightly slanted. I don't want very many brush strokes that are just straight across. That's going to kill the feeling of form in the ground. So even if I'm looking at ground area that's real flat, I still try and make the brush stroke maybe slightly convex. It just makes it look more three-dimensional, where a straight brush stroke on the flat ground does not. So even a flat ground, slightly half-rounded, just to make your painting have more depth to it. This was another muted grade color I wanted to use. This is orange and ultramarine blue, and they could mix a gray that's more on the cool side or more on the warm side. So more blue or more orange, depending on where it's going, get it the right value. And I used it a lot, some in the greens, some in the cliff. And it's just a gray that helps mute some of the color. And a lot of the mixing also is done directly on the canvas. I mean, a lot is mixed on the palette, obviously, but then I'll come back with other colors and just drag them in and let them mix a little bit right on the canvas. Like the violet was brushed in directly on the canvas so that it stood out more. It gives you more color variety if you do some mixing right on the canvas, as opposed to doing all the mixing on the palette. Now let's go look at some paintings. This is a painting by Fyodor Zakharov. He was a Russian painter. I think he passed away in the 1980s. So his heyday was 50s, 60s, 70s, or at least 60s, 70s, 80s. Very expressive brushwork. And you can see, like down here, he's doing a lot of mixing right on the canvas. Maybe starting with a warmish violet here for the whole thing. Then just blending subtle color changes. It's not a big color change or big value change, but the red, a little bit darker violet, some green, some orange, just a variety of colors, but really expressive brushwork in there that, looks good. It's almost just painting for painting's sake, more than trying to give you the feel of a road here. It doesn't do that for me. But it really gets me excited about painting. That's what I love about his work. Same thing here with the shrubbery. It doesn't really describe shrubbery. If I were to cut this out, you wouldn't know what it is. But in relation to everything, that's really nice. Whatever kind of shrubbery it is. His values are extremely accurate. And his color is really interesting. And good drawing, good contrast. But the brushwork, very expressive. There's no blending totally in areas to get rid of brushwork. And my guess is, even in the real light areas, if we were to see this in person, like the light wall on the house or here, there's probably more color variation in there. But really nice painting. This is another one of his still life. You can see the brush strokes here on the table. It's hard to say what color that table is. I mean, it's a neutral color. It's a gray color. Whether he started with blue and orange or green and red or yellow and violet, those are complementary colors. You can mix gray with them. But after doing that, he added some grayish red, grayish blue violet, grayish violet, some green. A lot of color in there. It's just dragging one color on top of the other, kind of pushing and pulling the paint and creating real nice brushwork. And All of it's like that. The bottle here has a lot of color variation that you can't plan as much as you just getting the right value, the right color mixtures, that it just happens. You have really no idea what it's going to look like because you're using a bit more expressive brushstroke. What he can control is the overall shape, overall value, and the overall basic color or temperature. But when you're blending or mixing your color some of it right on the canvas, you don't have total control, which is nice. You don't always know exactly what it's going to look like at the end when you use thicker paint and do mixing right on the canvas instead of all of it on the palette. But you can also see the real strong color in here, the yellow, greens, the oranges, and then all this grayer color. Really makes these stronger areas stand out. I mean, this stands out, this, that all stands out because of the grayer color around it. Really like his work. Now, this is an acrylic painting by Charles Movalli, passed away in 2016. East Coast painter, Massachusetts, worked in acrylic. But you can see the brush strokes here, the mixing right on the canvas. Now, acrylic doesn't mix that well right on the canvas because it dries so quick. And not being an acrylic painter, I mean, I do very little acrylic painting, so I can't speak as much to the technique, but he'd be doing the same thing in oil and get the same result. Getting this shadow pattern down first in the snow, and then coming back and just dragging other colors into it. Now with acrylic, you probably have to match the value a lot better because you can't necessarily always blend it like you can with oils. There is some blending in here, but a lot of it, the brush strokes stand out. There's no blending of the brush strokes. And that's what I like about his work. So he has very accurate values. His drawing is really good. And brush stroke is really expressive. He's not overly rendering things. Again, if you were to cut this out, you might have trouble understanding what that is. But in relation with everything else, everything reads perfectly. It's not tight. It's not photographic. In fact, I don't even know if he used photography. I know he painted outside mostly. He might have painted inside some. Really good painter. This is a painting by Willard Metcalf during his France period, where he painted in France and understanding Impressionism a lot more. And you can see he's establishing the dark shadow on the ground here and then coming back with brush strokes that lighter violet, some oranges, and just chopping into that green, allowing those brush strokes to really show. Same thing with the haystacks. This is the basic color, the kind of orange, orange and alizarin crimson, a little bit of violet, and then coming back with lighter violet just to show the reflection of the sky on the haystacks in here. Very nice. Same thing with the trees. A lot of blending right on the canvas after establishing the big shapes with colors and values that you mix on the palette. And that takes a while to get used to, blending right on the canvas, because your values are off at first. You have to learn to control your values a lot better. But it gives you a lot more color variation and allows the brush strokes to stand out a lot more. A couple more here. This is John Enking, another East Coast painter, early 20th century, maybe late 19th. A lot of thick paints, especially in the lights, using a little bit of outline here to emphasize the shape of some of these rocks. You can use outline like this very effectively when it's just kind of broken line or spots of line that kind of emphasize the shape, in this case, of the rocks or a rooftop or something like that. But a lot of broken color. In other words, applying different color within the shadow area. You got slightly muted blue, violet, and you're adding some reds and oranges and greens in there. A lot of color variation that's done right on the canvas. Some of it obviously is mixed on the palette to get it all blocked in, filled in, but a lot of oranges, violets, greens, grays scrubbed in there with brush strokes that, again, using thicker paint to make it look like paint and not look look photographed. And this looks very detailed, a lot of detail in here. And this looks busy, looks detailed, a lot of detail in here and in the rocks. But I'm sure he reduced it from what it really was quite a bit. Simplified the shapes quite a bit. But good contrast and values in there. Last one here, another Charles Movalli. Again, kind of a busy harbor scene, a lot going on. So very busy. But my guess is he simplified it quite a bit even from what it was. Good job of having big, flatter areas in here in the background. Some of this area a little more simple. They get really busy in just 2 or 3 areas. But a lot of choppy brush strokes to kind of break it up. But I like the color variation, some strong color, some grayer color. Really busy. This would be a hard one to paint because it is so busy. He's not concerned about rendering here. You know, again, I have no idea if that's a boat, but in relation to everything in the whole painting, it reads like a cluttered harbor. And that's hard to do because we want to render. We want to define what everything is in there. But he always did a great job of showing clutter and just stuff. And you know, in relation to everything else, what's going on. But he didn't render it exactly. I mean, he rendered the boat here a little more, the sail, the house. But outside of that, everything is just pushing and pulling brush strokes and kind of focusing on the right value. Well, that'll do it. I hope that helps in giving you some understanding on thinking more about using brush strokes that make your painting look like paint instead of trying to render everything you see in a photograph.